Morning, everybody. My name is Steve Schad. Welcome this morning to EBITDA Partners, Anxious, Angry, and Disengaged, the mood of the American workforce and how business owners need to respond to get and keep talent. There's been a lot of talk about this over the last 2 years as the pandemic has progressed, and things actually have changed a little bit. I'm going to talk about how things have changed with the American workforce, things that we're experiencing also here in our local market. The things I'll talk about are very relevant to what we see here in the Twin Cities and the surrounding areas. And we're going to talk about specific things that businesses can do to respond. This is a totally different game that we're involved in these days. And so businesses have to really have their act together. And we're going to talk about what that means and what you can do to do the best that you can in the kind of market that we have. EBITDA Partners, we're a consortium of experts, executives who come from a range of disciplines, and we help our partners, our clients grow and share resources and referrals to be able to help our business clients be successful in solving complex business problems and managing change. Here's our group. The first portion of our group, we've got Angie Johnson, involved with risk management and construction. She's an expert in that arena. Kathy Sadaka, finance and fractional CFO. Charanjit Gill is a supply chain and operations expert who recently joined our group. Courtney Taylor's been with us for a year and a half or 2 years now in banking. Dave Meyer, who's helping me host today, is with digital marketing agency BusyWeb he owns. Greg Pomerantz is marketing strategy, Jeff Redmond, legal and business strategy. And then rounding us out, we've got Justin, who just joined us in the last couple of months, who is focused on tax and accounting, Keith Schoolcraft, information technology, Scott Plum, sales, and myself on human resources. So you can see from the really breadth of the experience that we bring to the table that we're a full solution for our clients. And so we host these monthly events to be able to share our expertise, to bring in outside speakers, and to be able to create a community of business owners and executives who can learn from us and from each other, and to be able to network and help to build business. So I'm your presenter today. I own a company called Optima Advisory. We are a fractional and interim chief human resource officer placement. That's a fancy way of saying we place part-time HR executives into small companies who can't rationalize having a full-time head of HR that has the kind of corporate experience to be able to do the kinds of things that we're going to talk about today. My team brings that kind of expertise and experience where a small business might not be able to really rationalize having somebody full-time in that role. We also augment your HR staff with resources to help when you're in a pinch. And we've got expertise where we can do various projects such as leadership development, building performance management systems, culture initiatives, engagement, et cetera. So that's me, my background. I've worked in one corporate environment. It was with a really great company here locally, Anderson Windows. Otherwise, I've spent most of my career doing consulting work in and out of the private and public sectors, and had a ton of experience mostly on the HR strategy and organizational development side of HR. So with that, I'm going to get us into our content. Enough of the pitch for EBITDA. We've got a number of the members on board today. We'll open them up and promote them as panelists later in the program in case you have questions about their disciplines. But for today, what I'm going to focus on is really helping us understand how what's happening in the broader labor force, and understanding those dynamics and how it might impact your company's employees. We're going to talk about some of the trends and best practices that are emerging to address these challenges, which are in some cases temporary, in other cases, and I think in most cases, a lot of the changes we're experiencing are going to be permanent or lasting changes that continue to evolve. And finally, we'll bring it down to the practical on what are some of the steps that you can do to redefine the employee experience and to make your workplace more sticky to current and future employees. So we can't ignore what's going on. We can't wait until it stops. We've got to take action today, and that's what we're going to talk about. So with that, I'll get us rolling into the first piece of this. So the reality that we're experiencing today is that there are frankly just fewer workers available. So if you look at the long-term population trends, this one isn't news, but it is starting to show up. And I looked at about a 50-year trend line for working age population. This is going to be people who are between the ages of 16 and 64. And that population of the United States has begun a decline. And this decline, as you can imagine, the baby boomers retiring. When I started at Anderson in 2006, I attended a workshop that was hosted by the company on what was happening with the workforce. And they were panicked in 2006 about what was happening with the retirement age of baby boomers. And it was really just starting at that time. And millennials were coming into their own in the workplace. Gen Z was just being born at the time. And so we were really starting to be concerned because we saw the numbers. The millennials were a large group, but the baby boom group was huge. And Gen X, which I'm a part of, was pretty tiny. So the reality is just the available workers has started that decline over the last 10 to 15 years, and it's going to continue, and it's going to accelerate because the baby boomers are getting to that point where they just don't want to or can't work anymore. Another dynamic that we have going on in the United States is that the workforce participation rate is on the decline. So what that means, it's hovering at around 68% of that working age population is actually working. And so if you look at the split between males and females in the workforce participation rate, men were participating in the workforce at a rate of about 97% in the 1950s. And that number has declined into the upper 60s, low 70s over the last 50 years or so. And so it's an interesting trend, and it accelerated during the last Great Recession in 2008. The workforce participation rate dropped really significantly, and it never really recovered since then during the economic recovery over the last 12 years. So it's an interesting problem that we have. The reasons for that, there's some correlation with expanded definitions of disability, and that more people are in that category. And so they're leaving the workforce and going on to disability through Social Security. There's also just a trend of people who are maybe resetting their expectations about their family income and lifestyle. And so there's a shift going in that direction as well. Interestingly, females coming into the workforce were offsetting that, and really from the early 70s until recently, that portion of the population, their participation in the workforce has increased, obviously, as more women have decided to pursue professional careers, versus the stay-at-home model that was present in the 50s and 60s. And so that's had a real positive effect on the available workforce. But it hasn't been enough recently to offset, and that has started to decline. And this pandemic caused a real drop. And if you just think about what's been happening in our economy, with schools shutting down and people having the stress and strain of dealing with, kids that are now at home having to learn from home. You've got caregivers, aging population, the sandwich generation at Gen X having to now take care of older parents. This is something that has also contributed to this. The other dynamic is that we've also seen a net immigration rate decline. It peaked in the 1990s, and it was the rate has gone down significantly since then. And over the last 5 years, there's been between a 1% and a 2% drop in immigration, net immigration, during that time. And so roll that all together with a birth rate decline that's happening in the United States. That just came out in the news 2 years ago. For the first time, we had a decline in the birth rates in the United States. And what you have is a shrinking pool of available workers. And so businesses are having to compete more intensely for fewer players on the field. So that's a huge dynamic and one that businesses can't ignore. And even though the colleges have been pumping out grads over the last number of years, as colleges become a primary choice for young people who are going into the workforce, that has had a huge impact on blue collar jobs and what's happening with the trades. And so there's a real crisis, and one of the reasons why we're having such a hard time with the cost of labor and the pressure that's been building up, especially in the careers that don't require a college education. So the other thing that's happening, so the second trend or set of trends that's happening is that workers are becoming less committed. And in 2021, for the first time, Gallup saw a decrease in the overall levels of engagement. I think I spoke to this group earlier in the pandemic in 2020, and I mentioned that thankfully the engagement level had not declined yet, and in fact had increased a little bit. And we attributed that to what was happening with people, kind of the rallying cry of, hey, let's do what we can here to band together. But as the pandemic has worn on and as new opportunities have presented themselves, workers are now in the driver's seat and they know it. And so what's happening is there's more sensitivity to what's happening in the workplace. Workers are being more discerning, and they're saying that, hey, I've got a lot more choices. And what you're seeing is more interest in starting businesses. Business startups over the last 2 years have been at a record pace. We're seeing that people are, there's been talk about the Great Resignation. It's a real dynamic. It's not hitting every industry equally, but the job quits rate has increased dramatically over the last few months. And so what people were predicting is actually coming true. So there's a lot of froth in the labor marketplace. The choices that people have are really, hey, I can maybe go somewhere else and make a little bit more money. On average, somebody who is going to switch jobs will see a somewhere in the neighborhood of an 8% pay increase versus sticking to a job where I might get a 3 or 4% pay raise with each successive year. So there's an inherent motivation, financial motivation for people to jump ship because it does result in an increase in pay. It also, people are really thinking about what's important to them. And there is, I'll talk about this in a little bit, but there is a dynamic of people, really contemplating what they want out of their work life. And so they're taking advantage of the choices that are maybe available to them that weren't before. So what's behind all this? Why are people maybe less committed? What's happening with what's going with the reduced participation rate in the workforce and that sort of thing? So there's a big dynamic of increased stress. So we've talked about this already. The dynamic of there's family needs that have to be met. People are opting to be able to take advantage of either new flexibility or demanding more flexibility so that they have the ability to kind of navigate the comings and goings of family, kind of the drop of a hat. The kids have to school from home. And so that need to kind of meet the needs of the family. There's also a huge issue around wellness. And the wellness issue is around both the emotional and psychological wellness and needs. There's physical wellness with people getting sicker. People are delaying treatment for things because of the full hospitals. As a dynamic, you've got a financial wellness piece of this as well, where there's an increased financial strain either from medical costs or from just the uncertainty or people losing their jobs, either temporarily or perhaps jobs being eliminated. We did have a client the other day that was sharing that they're now going through a pretty significant round of layoffs because of the supply chain issues. And so there hasn't been a lot of talk about layoffs happening in the business world. It's usually around, hey, we can't find enough labor. But as the pain of the supply chain issues continue to unfold, we're going to start to see more strain showing up in business who can't meet customer demand because of what's happening in their supply chains. And so there's a financial element of this that's creeping into people's lives. They're not spending their money on travel, but there are impacts in families where people may have either temporarily for long-term lost their jobs. And so these are issues that are increasing the stress on families. And just the overall social isolation that's been happening during the pandemic. People aren't having the same kind of family experiences, social and work experiences that they've had that kind of feed our human need for contact and connection and interaction. And so those forums that we've had for us to be able to have that kind of emotional support and satisfaction have been impacted as well. So there's also just a general climate of what I call dissatisfaction that's happening out there. And if you think about what's happening in our public sphere, tribalism is something that is really running rampant. People are kind of collecting around like minds. There was a story in NPR the other day about people who are moving to different geographies to be with people who are more like themselves. So red areas are getting more red, blue areas are getting more blue. And so that otherism is really taking root in our culture. And the traditional ways that we've had of addressing that or creating more commonality than difference, it's getting harder to find. And those mechanisms that we've had in the past really aren't having the same positive impact on our society. So there's an element of that, and this conflict is showing up in the workplace. It's showing up over, differences of opinion about how the pandemic should be handled, vaccine masking. It's showing up in political conversations are getting more heated. People are either avoiding them or it's spilling over into more overt conflict in the workplace. And so it is something that is impacting kind of the overall feeling of, the sense of satisfaction that people have. Loss of faith in traditional institutions, the relationship primarily in business now, the relationship between the employer and the worker is different than it has been in the past. This has been a trend that's been going on for a long time, but people don't join a company to retire anymore. That's kind of an obvious statement, but it is, it's just part of this overall stew that's happening in terms of how people view organizations. The faith in our public sector and government as a solution support for society is eroding. There's all sorts of and this kind of disruption, lack of trust or faith in those types of things that have traditionally been anchors for people, I think is just making people feel like, hey, I'm going to look out for myself. There's a little bit more of a focus on the individual and their needs. And so their commitment to an organization is going to be harder to achieve just because there's an attitude of, hey, if I can't get what I need here, I can go somewhere else. And so that's another dynamic of kind of workers being in the driver's seat. And then there's also this sense of there's a growing inequity. There's a lot of talk about what's happening in terms of wage and income disparities, what's happening in the top earners in organizations versus the rank and file workers. We're seeing an increase in union activity in certain areas of our economy. We're seeing, a push for maybe more taxes on one side, fewer taxes and more push for more openness and less regulation in the business environment on the other. And so, and then you can't ignore kind of the social aspects of what's happening with the fight for social justice on the part of African Americans, and a desire for a more inclusive and accepting society. And those things are showing up in the workplace, and businesses are having to confront, what's our position on these things, and how are we can make a statement about diversity, equity, and inclusion, but how do we actually turn that into a reality if it is something that we truly want to do? And if so, how do I make that happen, especially in an area where maybe we have a preponderance of, Caucasian folks? It's harder to find more diversity. Thinking about how to do diversity in an area where we don't have a lot of diversity can be challenging. So all of these things are kind of coming together to make it harder for businesses to create the kind of environment that maybe was easier 10 years ago. And so it's definitely a dynamic that companies are struggling with. And then another aspect of this, talking about why are employees feeling like they have better options. Obviously, the finance piece of this is key, right? If I can get that increase in pay, somebody else is going to offer me better work-life balance. Somebody else is going to be able to give me the flexibility to work from home if my employer currently doesn't support that. It's been a huge topic of conversation. I was just involved in a client conversation the other day about, hey, we said we were going to be a more flexible organization. We put things in place, but we're still getting noise from the workers that we're not a flexible workplace. So how do we get our employees to feel like we're offering a more flexible work environment, which is the reality in terms of the policy that we put in place, but it's not the experience that employees are having. And so how do we actually turn that into more of a reality without really there's a sense of, I'll call it fear about what rampant flexibility will do to the organization. So you've got kind of this either or mentality that's happening both on the employer side in terms of, hey, if I go too far, this is really going to erode culture. It's going to erode engagement. It's going to be difficult for us to manage. And from the employee side, they're saying they haven't changed at all. This is, companies are advertising all the time from work from home positions. And so they're going to start looking at those opportunities and are looking at those opportunities because the story that is out there in the marketplace is you can have the kind of flexibility that we're talking about. You just need to apply, and people are starting to apply and look for those types of jobs. Very challenging. And then the last item on there, passion paradigm. I saw that phrase yesterday. You have a generation of people who have been brought up to believe that their work should be their passion and fulfillment is the most important thing. If you think about the baby boomer generation and Gen X, we were kind of raised on you join an organization, you commit and you grind, and passion is something that you pursue outside of the workplace. That has flipped. And this is a purely non-judgmental statement about it, because there is a strong belief that, hey, if you're not experiencing the kind of fulfillment that you want out of life and at your work, then you have an opportunity to pursue that. And that's a great place. That's a great kind of economy to have, where people have that kind of flexibility and the ability to pursue those passions. Hey, I'm working for a dirty old industrial company. Why can't I go work for a cutting edge green technology company? There's a lot of great options out there. Maybe I'll start my own business and do something that I love and make money at it. And so become a gig worker, or, hang a shingle, or start my own company. That dynamic is one that is very real. And it's a different kind of mindset than that's been really growing as millennials came of age. And now Gen Z has experienced that in spades. The other element, I just saw a statistic yesterday about Gen Z. They are, as they start their careers, their confidence in their career went from somewhere in the upper 90s, which is typical of people who are just entering the workforce has dropped down into the 70s and 80s. And the reason for that is the enduring pandemic, the disruption that's been happening in the workplace. And so you've got a new generation of workers who are coming in and coming of age at a time when things are really abnormal. And so their view of the workplace and career is going to be deeply shaped by this. And so we can't underestimate what 5-10 years down the road this is going to mean for our businesses, as you have people who are experiencing something incredibly unique. It may not be unique down the road, and some of these changes may stick, but that's even more of a reason for us to be concerned about what's happening with that kind of incoming generation. So I'm going to pause and take a look at the chat to see if there are any questions or comments that might have come in as we go. Could I get the stats on engagement levels before and during the pandemic? I'd love to cite them in a video and call you out. I don't have the numbers right in front of me. What happened was we saw a 2 percentage point increase in number of disengaged, and we saw increase in disengaged, and then so actively disengaged. So those in Gallup's realm, those are people who are really have quit and stayed. So those are people who are what they call actively disengaged. And then we also saw a decline in the number of people who are fully engaged. So, and that happened in the second half of 2021, and that was Gallup. So that's the dynamic that's happening there. Thank you, Eric, for that. And Alex asked, workers may seem less loyal, but can't the same be true of companies? Layoffs are down now because workers are in demand, but it wasn't so long ago that they were rampant. Absolutely. And I think this, my belief is, Alex, that this is part of the dynamic where businesses are focused on profit and sustained profit, and that commitment or that social contract has eroded from both ends. And so the thing that is really interesting to me in this dynamic is we've had worker surplus for so long, businesses just assume that they can offer the lowest price and they'll get their jobs filled. And there's a little bit of grumbling, and I would say undeserved, by businesses who are saying, hey, nobody wants to work. Well, nobody wants to work for what you're paying. And so as a business owner, I hear it all the time, this belief in our system that says supply and demand drives cost. And so now you're in a classic supply and demand situation with labor, and you're going to pay one way or the other. Somehow you're going to have to pay. So you're either going to pay by not filling your roles and having openings longer, productivity hits because of that, people scrambling to take up the slack or the extra work that has been left behind by departing workers. So there's hidden costs, and then there's the actual costs of what you're going to pay for benefits and compensation. And those are all things that businesses just have to accept. There's example after example of companies, I'm going to talk about this a little bit later, who have shifted more resources towards workers, and they've got more workers than they could ever want. And they have decided that we're going to make the investment and we're going to shift some of the resources from maybe profit or executive salary to worker pay, and they're reaping the rewards of that. So this is a bit of a reality check. So Alex, thanks for your comment on that. So apparently I've got an opinion about that. So another question that came through, do you think the employment issues are a slippery slope, such as cancel culture? At some point, are these employees never happy, no longer no matter what the employee does? Yeah, I think that's going to be maybe a dynamic with some of the population out there. I think the reality is that, hey, if I think that I've got better options, and the personal risk that I'm going to experience is maybe less than it has been in the past. I think that's going to put the power on the worker side, and frankly, business owners just aren't accustomed to that. So I think there's a little bit of we're making a shift here that businesses have to get comfortable with a new way of things being. And so that's not an easy thing to get through. Can you speak to how all of this has affected productivity? Good question. I actually can't. I was going to look at the productivity numbers yesterday and I didn't. So, I think that we're seeing the productivity gains are really coming through technology advancements. And so there's been an increase or a speed up of the adoption of technology. I'm going to talk about automation in a little bit. Last year, there was a 39% increase in spend on automation in business. And so reaching record levels. And so the cost of robotics has gone down. Businesses are really looking at that as a solution to increase the productivity. And so that's a real dynamic that's happening as well. Have you heard anything about programs to encourage more young people to pursue skilled trades instead of college degrees? Yes, there's a big push for that. I think the cost benefit balance has shifted. And I think that there's a lot of people who are sensitive to the college debt that's been incurred. And so there is definitely a move in that direction. Industry is focused on that. I'm on the board of Century College Foundation. That's a huge issue for us in terms of encouraging people to explore non-4-year degree, either associate degrees or certifications for the trades. So it is definitely something that is being pushed actively and invested in by both businesses and the public sector. Good questions. So let's move on. Let's start talking about some of the solutions to this. COVID really has a lot of the things that we're talking about were kind of underlying issues that have been made worse by COVID. What we are experiencing really is new uncertainty. The game has changed. And so how do we deal with this dynamic of, people who are more willing to take a risk and maybe shop around? We've got, the stresses that I was talking about earlier, those were there anyway. Burnout was happening anyway, and COVID just made that a lot worse. It's also caused a period of reflection and rethinking. There's a real psychological dynamic that happens when people experience what you would consider to be milestones, or breaks. So if you think about it, New Year's resolutions, turning a certain age, getting traded from one baseball league to another. I was just listening to a podcast the other day on this whole thing about those types of transitions. And it's a human thing to stop and reflect and say, what do I really want? Now, if you're in crisis and you have to get a job because you've got to pay for things, you're not going to spend a lot of time. It's Maslow's hierarchy, right? I'm not going to spend a lot of time thinking about how I'm going to self-actualize. I'm going to focus on getting my needs met as a family. And so what you have is we have a large population, especially office workers, college educated, people who have maybe more choices in terms of career options that they have available to them. And so people who have the means to do so are really in that period of, what do I really want? And I've talked to so many people who are just tired of the grind of the corporate job. People are looking to make a change. And so this is a problem for business, but it's also an opportunity. It's an opportunity for really businesses to rethink that employee experience. How do we structure and provide that work environment and in a way that is going to be attractive and is going to be sticky? So let's talk about the solution side of this. So there's a dynamic of this where businesses really have to think about the supply and demand of labor. On the demand side, how can you reduce your need for workers? Okay, what can you achieve through greater efficiency? There's an increase in interest in lean manufacturing principles, for example. How do we get more productivity and better quality, more efficiency, better cost savings by applying the principles of lean? So the efficiency side of things can add capacity without adding headcount. The other aspect, which I mentioned before, is the automation side of things. This can be done through information technology, automating business processes through software solutions in businesses, but it is also through robotics. I saw a speaker several months ago who was kind of on the leading edge of what's happening with AI and automation, robotic technology. The cost of robots, both cobots, those are things that are going to work side by side with humans to get work done, as well as full automation through robotics. The cost of those solutions is dropping every day. And so there's a huge increase in competition for providers. There's consultants out there that can help you. You'll hear horror stories from businesses who have spent a lot of money on robotics that sit in a corner and don't do anything. The application side of this has gotten a lot smarter. So there's people who know really how to do this and do it well and make it cost effective and get a return on that investment that could be seen in months. So when you think about the cost of labor in your business, you really should be seriously looking at those solutions. Workforce design is another one where it's, there's a reason why there's more jobs available for remote workers. It's because businesses have figured out I don't have to have somebody from my backyard to be able to do my bookkeeping. I don't have to have somebody who's on site. My business is built around the idea that, hey, we can serve pretty much any business anywhere using virtual communication technology to be able to make things happen. There's no reason why you can't be hiring workers in remote areas, different geographies to be able to get work done. There's also, how do you rethink, there's this idea that I've got a job to fill versus I have work that needs to get done. And that simple mind shift from the former to the latter is going to help you to rethink, hey, this is not necessarily about getting an FTE into my organization. Maybe this is about how do I use my existing resources, maybe with some outside contract resources to get the work done, and really rethinking the approach. So how do I design my workforce for maximum flexibility, reducing the core permanent cost of that labor, and doing things really differently and getting creative about how work is going to get done. So that opens up using more gig workers or contractors to get things done. It opens up the possibility of using workers that might be in other markets, et cetera. And then the last item on here is what's interesting. When I was looking at the workforce statistics, there's roughly I get my numbers right, there's 10.9 million jobs. There's something like 6.8 million unemployed. So there's roughly $4 million job delta there between available workers and available jobs. There's also 5.7 million people who are underemployed or long-term unemployed. So they're not on the unemployed rolls, but they want to work. They would work if they could. And so there really hasn't been much attention paid to that part of the population. It's an invisible workforce. And we were doing some work with a client on how do you go out there and shake the tree? How do you find, have you ever seen the video of the walnut or the almond tree shaker. It's this machine that goes up with these big clamps and grabs onto the trunk of the tree, and it shakes it like this, and all these nuts come down onto the sheet. So how do we get into those pools of labor that are really hidden from us? We had a client that they specifically and intentionally went after being a second chance employer, which means they were purposeful about finding workers that are coming out of the correctional system. And so if you think about the traditional kind of HR policies that you put in place, it's ridiculous to say, hey, you can't have any kind of criminal experience in your background. It's too much risk for us, and we're not even going to look at you. And I remember the spreadsheet we had at Anderson, and it was color coded on, here are the various things that if you do these things, you're either red, yellow, or green. And the things that were red on there, there were a lot of things red that didn't necessarily have to be red, right? And every business is like that because we just don't want to deal with it. Here's a business that has taken the risk, and their motivation for doing so is pretty interesting. It's kind of a faith-based approach and kind of a belief grounded in this idea of redemption. And so their threshold for criminal behavior is, hey, homicide is acceptable if it was a crime of passion versus premeditated. And so they will take somebody who has that kind of a record. But they don't just say, okay, we're going to hire people, and that's the end of it. What they've realized is we have to have a system in place where we can ensure that somebody like that is going to be successful. Otherwise, we're just wasting our time and we're going to waste our resources. And if you do it right, the result is you're going to get committed employees for life. So if you start to look around and really kind of take a different lens on who's out there and available to work, there's a lot more people out there. And so remember I said earlier, you're going to pay one way or another, you're going to pay. And so these are not the best paid workers, but the cost of taking them into the organization is higher because you have to have better, you have to have really well thought out policies and how you handle different situations. You have to really understand what your, second, third infraction is. You have to be prepared for sudden lapses. You have to have supervisors who are skilled at dealing with conflict or people that might have emotional issues, substance abuse issues, and helping people through a process of getting from who they are today to who they can be, their full potential, redemptive, right? So those types of thinking, that's the cost of these sorts of things. So just accept that you're going to have more cost. So where are these non-traditional workers that you can kind of shake out of the tree? And what are the things that are keeping them out of the workforce? Childcare. There are millions of people who want to work full time who can only work part time. Transportation, childcare, elder care. There's a slew of issues that they have to deal with in their personal life. How about you figuring out how can we create an environment where we've got flexible policies, people can come and go, and we've got a system where we can kind of handle the work as it shifts as people need to address their issues. Maybe you give people a childcare allowance. There again, there's cost, right? But what a great cost and what a great investment, because you might get a great worker who would otherwise not be able to work unless they had childcare. Providing at work childcare. There's all sorts of things that you can be thinking creatively around, and work with nonprofit. There are nonprofits out there who can help you figure out how to do this so that you're not doing it on your own. And we could also do things collectively with a group of businesses, maybe through an association, to help address some of those things. And then the final thing that I'm going to talk about is probably the most important, which is how do we make the employee experience sticky, right? People are right now, money is a big motivational factor that everybody is talking about. But the reality is people are leaving their jobs and the money is fleeting, they hate their managers, they hate the culture, the business doesn't care about them. And that's the reality before the pandemic, and it's still the reality today. So you can throw more money at them, and you should be making sure that you're paying well and that you're addressing what's happening in the benefits world, which we'll talk about in a minute. But you really just need to neutralize that. You don't need to overpay. You don't have to be the top payer, because you're going to get a better result if you focus on prioritizing the person and ensuring that they have the resources and support that they need for their whole selves, that you're thinking about their development and their career progression. It's all the good business practices. The things that were maybe nice to haves 3 years ago are now must haves. They are table stakes if you're going to attract and keep the right people in your organization. And you got to fix your managers. People are leaving because of how they're being treated and how they're being managed. The pandemic has introduced a whole new way of leading that managers just aren't accustomed to. And so what are you doing to make your managers better leaders? So let's break these down. Neutralize the money factor. There's this idea of ownership. So employee-owned companies, this is becoming really more of interest to small business owners, because finding buyers, right now it's going well, and the premium for businesses is at an all-time high. But there's also this idea of the employee-owned employee stock as a solution for exits or transitions that I think is really intriguing to businesses. People who really are concerned about what's going to happen to my workers. Are they going to have long-term employment prospects? How is this going to impact their families in the long term? And so the idea of employee ownership can be attractive through that lens. There's ways that you can do it where you're not actually giving up actual shares of the company, but it creates a sense of ownership. So sharing in the success, as well as kind of shares that represent kind of the overall success of the business and how we've done and the value of the company. If you can introduce that into an organization, that can be really attractive. It's going to be more attractive to kind of mid-career, late career professionals versus early career. Early career folks are going to be more interested in kind of what's hitting their paycheck or what's not coming out of their paycheck. But it is something that you should be looking at. Looking at the costs and the variety of benefits. There's a lot of creativity that's happening with how organizations are bringing new benefits to the table, voluntary benefits. And it's interesting that the utilization or the first time buy of some of the voluntary benefits has been on the increase over the last couple of years. And so that can be, they don't have to be a cost to the organization. But you really should be thinking about what it does cost to the individual. So more that you can offer for free or no cost to the employer, reduce cost to the employee. Taking on more of the healthcare costs is also something that's been happening over the last couple of years. And so really looking strategically at your benefits strategy and really thinking differently about that and taking advantage of some of the new products that are out in the marketplace and making sure that you're in line with the marketplace. The average increases that businesses are seeing, the 4 or 5% versus 3%, which has been the traditional annual pay increase that's happening, is a real dynamic. So you don't want to be left behind, but emphasize the word neutralize, because really you're going to get more bang for the buck as you focus on the individual and your management team. So think about the flexibility that you have. You can do more, and people are more responsible than you probably give them credit for. And so there are businesses that still offer unlimited PTO, and people on this data has shown that people on unlimited PTO programs actually work more and longer hours than people who aren't. So this idea of having more flexibility is one that I think there's still more opportunity there for businesses than they've taken full advantage of. the idea of wellness, wellness resources, having access to employee support programs, financial well-being, financial planning, especially for earlier career professionals. Those are things that are attractive. Career development, career paths, these are all things that you've heard before. And this idea of fulfillment, how do you create a sense of fulfillment through work that maybe isn't on the surface that meaningful, creating those connections to kind of the heart of why I'm doing what I'm doing. What's the impact that we're having on the customer? What's the impact we're having on society? Being a part of a community, I won't say family. You don't want to have a family mentality about your business, but I'm part of an interconnected community where I get fulfillment from the connectedness that I have with my coworkers. Those are all things that you need to be paying attention to. And finally, and I'll get to questions here in a second, you got to fix your managers. The role of managers has really shifted over time. And it'd really be great if you could have better communicators in your supervisory team. They've got to be great organizers of work. And so if you're going to have flexibility, you have to have somebody who's highly organized to be able to kind of deal with the unforeseen or the unplanned. But just being an organized kind of execution focused leader is really critical. Somebody who's a good coach, somebody who can go in and give feedback, help people understand what they're good at, where they're not as good, and how to close that gap. There's a nuance in the coaching there as opposed to just being a good listener, which a lot of people can be a good listener or a friendly guy, but actually being somebody who can really understand how to move somebody from this level of performance to this level of performance. That's a skill set that has to be developed. Evaluator, this idea of I'm not going to work in a place where we carry dead weight. If I'm going to give my all in an organization, I want there to be accountability. I want there to be an organization that is managing performance, that is rewarding people who are doing well, and either managing out or managing up people who are underperforming. Again, this is not anything that's new, but if I'm going to choose to work somewhere, I'm going to work somewhere. If I'm a high performer, I'm going to work somewhere where there's a high expectation and people are generally operating at a higher level. Mediator, dealing with the conflict, dealing with how do we keep people aligned, get people focused on the right things, deal with conflict when it emerges. So having the skill to be able to lean into those types of conversations and to help people through what can be sticky, emotional situations is critical. Somebody who's a connector of need to resource, somebody who is connecting people in organizations, somebody who is kind of working across the system to be able to help people be effective and to feel supported in their job. And finally, somebody who's going to be a role model. At the end of the day, who am I looking up to? And it says a lot when you look at the leadership in an organization and what this company values and what's important to them because of who gets promoted, right? And so if they're not a role model, then what is it that went into the hiring decision or promotion decision for that individual? And was it the right call in terms of what you're rewarding in the organization? So I'll talk about that in a minute. I'm going to go to the Q&A. Beyond technology, how is working from home affecting productivity? It's not as high as it was. It's dipping a little bit. And the reasons are it's kind of dragged on pretty long. So, and also managers aren't accustomed to managing remote workers. Even after all this time, we're still kind of doing the same tapes of periodic check-ins, but managing a remote worker versus managing somebody who's on premise is a very different thing. And I don't think businesses have mastered it yet. I think we've just kind of grown accustomed to it. And people are to a large degree, I think they're kind of left on their own to figure it out. And we're placing a lot of emphasis on the individual's ability to overcome that versus the organization's intentionality around addressing it. mental health is on the increase. I don't think I have time to talk about some of the programs, but talk to your benefits providers about mental health resources that might be available. That'd be a good place to check. Organizations need to get comfortable with lower margins. That's a matter of opinion. My opinion is, I think the roosters have, what is it? They've come home to roost. I don't know, whatever that is. I think that we're just in a different reality. And so, there are profits that are happening. I think organizations are seeing the opportunity within what's happening with, supply chain. There's opportunity there, but I think generally there's probably a new reality that has to be adjusted to. Thoughts on employee liaison position to bridge the communications between, actually, I've got a pretty strong opinion about that, Anita. I think that managers need to be their own communicator. And if you look at my bullet points over here on the left, communicator is number one. And I think that this is the thing, right? It's going to cost you one way or another. Remember I said, this is going to cost you. So why not train or select managers who are good communicators, or train them to be good communicators? I think that if I'm an employee, I want to talk directly to my manager and have a good experience dealing with my manager versus somebody who's an intermediary. And so I think that's just, you're adding headcount where I don't believe it's necessary. I would say focus on your managers and help them be better communicators. There's some very basic things that you can do to help them be more effective in communications that don't require a personality change. Just giving them some tips and some tools that can help them kind of get more comfortable and give them the opportunity to be a better communicator, because a lot of times I don't have time, kind of a deal. That's either reality or an excuse. So how do you make time for them to be better managers versus delegating that to another third party? So I guess that's my thought on that. Let's see. Yes, it is recorded. That's Steve. Okay. Watching the activities in Russia, Ukraine. Is anyone concerned about our local economy? People are wanting pay raises, yet we have troubled economy, balancing payroll expectations. I don't think you're being a negative Nellie Marnie at all. I think your last question, I don't believe it. I don't believe when you look at the trends, it's not going to be an employer's market again for a long time. Do you remember slide 1? Declining working age population, declining workforce participation, declining immigration rates, and declining birth rates. Those 4 items are recipe for long-term tight labor markets. And I don't see anything happening that's going to change that. You're either going to see tremendous transformation in how work gets done, so it requires fewer workers, or we're going to have to dramatically change our immigration policies to be able to have more workers here. Or we're going to have to figure out, how do we get the people that are not participating in the workforce? What would get them to come back into the workforce? That last one is probably an area where we have the most immediate opportunity to make an impact, along with competing as a business, competing and being the very best employer, because not everybody on this call is going to do everything that I talked about, and they're not all going to do it well. So some of you are going to be winners and some of you are going to be losers in the labor market. So one way or another, you're going to have to put some shoulder into how you're managing your workforce so that they have a better experience. And you can tell that story to the marketplace so that people are going to look at you, are going to say, I want to work for that business. But I do not foresee a swing coming back. I think a lot of business owners are hoping that, and there may be some short-term recessionary periods where it feels like it's going in that direction, but long-term, I don't see anything changing. So next month, we have our own Kathy Sadaka is going to be speaking on the not so secret superpower of a successful business. I can't wait for this. Kathy is a great resource. Kathy, do you want to say anything about next week's program? You just got promoted to presenter status.
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I spent 25 years working in the turnaround industry with mostly businesses in distress. And there was one really common denominator amongst all of them. So when you're looking at, Steve mentioned all the new businesses that started recently, it's sad to say that nearly half of those will fail in the next 5 years. Kind of what's the difference between the businesses that succeed and those that fail? And having watched a lot in distress, I think I have some ideas for you.
Thanks, Kathy. I think Steve is just reconnecting to audio here. And thanks everyone for attending today's event, and especially make sure that you're ready for next month and for Kathy's presentation. You know how to follow Steve. He's available inside of all of the content, and you can reach Steve on LinkedIn or on email. And Steve, your email is schad@Optima Advisory, correct?
Yes. Apologize. My computer died at the very last minute.
Timing.
So I will. The slides have all of my contact information. So happy to connect with you. SSCHAD, Steve Schad, SSCHAD at OptimaAdvisoryLLC.com. Happy to connect and talk about whatever you might be experiencing.
Fantastic. Have a fantastic month, everyone. We'll see you next time. And thanks for joining our EBITDA Partners event. This will be posted on YouTube shortly. Thanks, Steve. Great job.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day. Bye.